You are listening to the Tank Magazine podcast. In this episode, Katherine Rundell reads her piece, Russia in the Late Summer. Rundell is a Fellow of All Souls College at the University of Oxford and a children's writer. Her latest book, The Explorer, is shortlisted for the 2017 Costa Children's Book Award, and she is currently working on her first novel for adults. The text version of this piece is published in the Tank Travel issue.
The first time I went to Russia, I was a child, and it was winter, and the snow came up to my thighs. St. Petersburg that Christmas was refracted through ice, and so classically beautiful as to seem a two-dimensional version of itself, staged and unreal. My uncle's house, on the banks of the Fontanka Canal, had once belonged to Tchaikovsky's brother, and was said to be the place where Tchaikovsky wrote the Nutcracker Suite in 1892. Although this is, I think, a little like the oak tree that concealed King Charles II from the Roundheads, there are several dozen trees and several different apartments, all claiming the same place in history. My grandfather lived there in the last years of his life, running a small religious community. FSB officials frequently turned up at his church, apparently convinced that nobody could be so relentlessly British without an ulterior motive. When I last went, it was the early 2000s, when fashion was still recovering from the 1990s. I was given a mink scrunchie for Christmas. I loved St. Petersburg then. It was a thing of lights and snow and Fabergé egg beautiful. But there are things that you miss as a child. History and scale, and the intricacies of a city's visage. I long wanted to see it again. This time, I return with a new friend, the photographer Gabby Laurent. It is the tail end of summer, and St. Petersburg wears a different face. We arrive, after just 3.5 hours on the plane, to a blue-white sky, and are driven to the Belmond Grand Hotel Europe, just around the corner from the Mikhailovsky Theatre. I travel fairly often for work, academic conferences and literary festivals, but rarely in style. I've seldom in my life been astonished by a hotel room, and usually in the other direction. Surprise at just how intimately you can know a neighbour through the wall. A mild startlement at what you pray is mayonnaise on the TV remote. But my room at the Belmond is astonishing. Named after the geometric artist and founder of the Suprematist movement, the Malevich suite is full of paintings commissioned to evoke his work. Its dining table seats 6. The entirety of my London flat would fit easily in the sitting room. The green of the velvet curtains is the colour of emeralds and dragons. The hotel itself has had a history that matches the changing fortunes of the city. In 1917, during the Bolshevik Revolution and the First World War, it was used as an orphanage, with lessons chanted in the ballroom. Rasputin dined in the breakfast parlour. Now, oligarchs stay in the 350 square metres of the presidential suite, which features a private gym and a study with a hidden door in a bookcase leading to the bedroom. The hotel subscribes to my own philosophy, which is that if you're rich and you don't have a hidden door in your bookcase, you are misusing your wealth. It is from this base that we set out to explore the streets. St. Petersburg wears its beauty like a knife in its shoe. It can flash out at any moment. Our hotel is set just off the city's main street, Nevsky Prospect, once briefly renamed Avenue of the 25th of October, in honour of the October Revolution of 1917. The buildings that line the road have sweep and scope, but the predominant colour is grey. It is when we round the corner to see the Church of the Saviour on Spilled Blood that we first feel we are in the Russia of our childhood picture books. It's a riot of rich red brick and gold leaf, of blue and green domes and filigree spires. The spilled blood in question belonged to Tsar Alexander II. In 1881, as his carriage was passing along the canal, an anarchist threw a grenade at his carriage. The Tsar was unhurt. He climbed down from his carriage, irate, to speak to the anarchist, whereupon a co-conspirator threw another bomb, killing both himself and, after several hours of heavy bleeding, the Tsar. The church was constructed on the spot of the assassination as a memorial. On the inside, the walls and ceiling are lined with more than 7,500 square metres of mosaic tiles, which depict biblical scenes and cast the light into gold. There is also a painted icon of the Romanov family, each with a halo. They were canonized by the Moscow Patriarchate in the year 2000. I was often told the story of their assassination in 1918 when growing up. When they were taken from the palace, the princesses had sewn their jewels into their underclothing, When they were shot, the first billets ricocheted off their diamonds. It took several rounds of gunfire for the children to die. The icon is a stark reminder of how much the Tsar is, for some, still cherished. We returned to the hotel for dinner at the Caviar Bar. Gabby hadn't yet tasted caviar, so we asked the waiter where best to begin. We are brought a platter of 5 different varieties, with sour cream and egg, blinis and cold-boiled potato. The beluga caviar is a revelation. It tastes of nuts, of butter, and the sea. I eat scrambled eggs infused with truffles, topped with caviar. I eat fish, topped with caviar. I revel in caviar as I never have before, and almost certainly will never have the chance to again. We drink Russian Chardonnay, which tastes like white Burgundy, and vodka. The vodka, served ice-cold, is like drinking purest stream water, if stream water wanted to avenge its father's death. The next day, our first stop is the Russian Museum. It houses a remarkable collection of classic and modern art, including Malevich's Black Square, which is as stark and remarkable as I had imagined, though surrounded at all times by children taking selfies with it. From there, we go to the Hermitage. The Russian Museum is by no stretch of the imagination small, but is dwarfed by the immensity of the Hermitage's collection. We wander for hours through the rooms. Some, in the Winter Palace, have been restored to look as they would have under the last Tsar. My favourite piece of art by far is a woolen and silk tapestry commissioned by the Tsar in 1757. It depicts a wild cat clawing at a furious animal that looks like a cross between a deer and a rhinoceros. The detail is as exquisitely fine as the subject is lunatic. Further on, there are gold-painted urns large enough to stand a child in, and Fabergé egg clocks. Of course, beautiful objects, especially beautiful things on such a staggering scale, are rarely for beauty alone. Displays of wealth thrill and awe. They also aim to quieten dissent with their assertion of power. To be in the Winter Palace is to be struck with the full force of the control the Tsars wielded. For dinner, we go on a quest for the best dumplings in St. Petersburg. They are warm and comforting and solid, dumplings with cherries and sour cream, with potatoes, with meat and vegetables. Although I know from experience that Russian home cooking is varied and fresh, in the menus of the restaurants we go to, cream and potatoes feature heavily. Happily, these are 2 of my favourite things. By the end of the trip, I do find myself desperate for the snap of raw vegetables, however, and take to ordering salad for every meal. The salad is potatoes and cream. The next day, I go searching for gifts in the market just off Nevsky Prospect. Matryoshka dolls are everywhere. There are traditional matryoshkas, each opening to offer the same face, with wide eyes and exquisite hand-painted dresses in reds and yellows. There are matryoshka trumps, which you open to reveal Putin, and Putin, which you open to reveal Trump. There are Hillary Clinton matryoshkas, standing at the back, gathering dust. Best of all is the Russian Politicians Through History matryoshka, which starts with Lenin and Trotsky and goes up to the present day. My best friend had this version until her dog ate part of it. The paint is highly toxic, and the dog spent the weekend vomiting bits of Mikhail Gorbachev all over the apartment. I decide that what I really want is amber. Sophocles believed that amber was formed in the lands beyond India, from the tears shed by birds for the death of the Greek hero Meleager. Pliny believed it came from a tree but was hardened by the swirl of the sea. In both cases, it's easy to see why. There is amber everywhere, of varying quality, long ropes you could wrap 6 times round your neck, selling for hundreds, and a single bracelet going for about £20. The stall holder holds a lit match against the amber beads to prove that it isn't plastic or glass, and gives it to me to smell. The scent is of churches and pine trees, and it looks, more than any other gem I can think of, like light incarnate. I haggle extremely badly. I'm probably ripped off. I find I do not care. That night, we go to the ballet. It's the Mikhailovsky, which is the second ballet to the Mariinsky, which is itself second to the Bolshoi in Moscow. But even the 3rd best ballet company in Russia is still a staggering thing to watch. We go to Swan Lake. I danced a little as a child, but Gabby, who is infinitely cooler, hasn't seen this particular ballet, so I tell her the plot. Look out, I say, for the solo at the end, where the Swan Princess Odette dies. It's famously difficult, famously beautiful. The dancers are dauntingly thin but technically accomplished. In the Danse des Petits Cygnes, in which 16 pas de chat must be rendered in perfect unison by 4 dancers, the sound of 8 point shoes on a sprung floor is as of 1 pair of feet. The final act begins. Prince Siegfried and Odette battle the evil enchanter Rothbart. Siegfried pulls off one of Rothbart's wings. Rothbart writhes rhythmically on the floor. I wait for Odette to die. Instead, she and Siegfried step over the twitching corpse and embrace, and the curtain comes down. Bewildered, I search Google Books for an answer. It turns out that in 1950, under the Soviet regime, Konstantin Sergeyev staged a version at the Mariinsky with a new ending, rewritten under pressure from the censors to have Odette and Siegfried live happily ever after. And this is the version that's still danced in St. Petersburg. Personally, I prefer the version with the more dying. One final shot of beauty comes from an unexpected source. The St. Petersburg metro is a thing of lavish pomp and ornament. We take the Red Line from Dostoevskaya to Avtovo, deep, deep underground. It's not for the claustrophobic, the metro here. The escalator takes several minutes to travel down. And I wonder at the magnificence of the empire that was the Soviet Union in the 1950s. Some stations have marble pillars. Others have vast brass hammer and sickles and ornate plasterwork on the ceiling, akin to a palace. We get out at Avtovo, where the pillars are made of sculpted glass. Chandeliers hang at intervals down each side of the platform. At the far end of the platform is a mosaic, proclaiming peace and commemorating the Leningrad blockade. A woman stands surrounded in gold, bearing a child aloft. It feels astonishing, especially as in London the best you might get is a disconcerted pigeon who got on the Hammersmith and City line and ended up panicked at King's Cross. On our way to the airport, we have time to stop and wander. First in dimly lit churches with incense and gold, then at Senate Square, once called Peter's Square. This is of particular interest to me because I wrote a few years ago a children's novel set in Russia called The Wolfwilder, and in the final scene the heroine rides into Peter's Square in a sled pulled by wolves. I wrote the square from memory. I discovered that I have wildly misremembered it. It stands on the edge of a river, which I knew, but in my false version it is surrounded by ornate architecture, a church and a ballet theatre. In real life it is surrounded by a traffic island. In the centre is the Bronze Horseman, a vast statue of Peter the Great, cast between 1770 and 1782. The body is sculpted by Etienne Maurice Falconet, and the face by Marianne Collot, Diderot's best friend, then only 18 years old. My book does not mention this statue. I quietly hope that none of my 12-year-old readers think to Google it. Our final stop before the airport is the monument to the heroic defenders of Leningrad on Victory Square. Mikhail Anikushin's sculptured frieze marks the 900-day siege of the city, the longest and most deadly blockade in history. With Leningrad cut off from the world by German and Finnish forces, 1 in 3 residents of the city died. Some survived by eating cats, sawdust, their own shoes. When, under Glasnost in the 1980s, fresh documents emerged detailing the siege, stories of astonishing heroism and sacrifice were revealed along with tales of cannibalism, and mothers forced to kill their own children rather than watch them starve to death. The sky-bright Church of the Spilled Blood was used as a morgue, and the Belmond Grand Hotel was used as a hospital, with 1,300 beds. My uncle's partner, Marina, is a native of St. Petersburg. Her mother was aged 2 when the siege began and 4 when she and her own mother were evacuated. They were years that scarred the family and everyone else who survived them. Anikushin, a sculptor of immense power, considered the monument his finest work. The central sculpture is of a mother cradling her soldier son. It's a thing of great and heartbreaking beauty. The airport comes into view soon after, and much too soon. There is still so much I want to see. Like the Kuznechny food market, which I went to as a child, where there are rows of old ladies from the countryside selling produce grown on their dachas, alongside pitchers of dairy products. The women dip small squares of paper into their pots and hand them to you, dripping with sweet or sour cream. I want to walk the streets and watch the buildings turn from Soviet brutalism to great sweeping facades painted in the Romanov family's burgundy and back again. I fly home longing to stay.
To hear more podcasts from Tank Magazine, be sure to subscribe through the iTunes Store. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.